Australia, the oldest, most extreme continent on Earth. Nowhere else do you find snakes more venomous, wildlife more bizarre. Over tens of thousands of years, people have adapted to this untamed land. They have endured its extremes and gradually learned to love it. From the rich jungle to the red desert to the snowy mountains. But in this vast island of wild beauty, the crowning jewels are Australia's national parks. The red heart of Australia. The legendary outback. This sunburned country reveals little of the verdant green rainforest that covered it 90 million years ago, when it was part of the supercontinent Gondwana. Australia's curious marsupials are the last living witnesses of that distant past. Why did they thrive here in such numbers and nowhere else? The polished sandstone domes of the Olgas and Uluru are sculpted by the eternal winds of geological time. This site, sacred to the Aboriginals, is guarded by one of the world's largest eagles, the wedgetail. The arid landscape is gouged by occasional violent floods, which subside, leaving the soil struggling to retain moisture. Spinifex grass is a great moisture miser. It grows abundantly in the poor red soil, but tastes like straw, even to the wild camels. Their ancestors were brought here as outback transport in the 19th century. With nearly 1 million camels, Australia now has the biggest population of wild camels in the world. The Australian continent has been an isolated landmass for over 50 million years. Both floods and scorching heat have made it what it is today. But biologist Peter Latz believes the biggest influence of all has been fire.
It burns like crazy. And the heat of the flames is going to push me off the side of the rock and I'm going to fall over. And this is a cold, frosty morning. And just imagine in a hot, windy summer's day, this fuel can just burn away the trees and shrubs. And that's how Spinifex takes over the country. It uses fire to get rid of its competitors and take over the country.
Rather than matches, though, the usual cause of desert wildfires is lightning. In most of Australia, bushfires are common. Years ago, Peter wondered how different this country would have looked without the influence of fire. He studied the fire sensitivity of shrubs, trees and other plants in the area where he grew up and which he knows best. The West MacDonnell Ranges, now a national park near Alice Springs. The parallel ridges of the West MacDonnells form a jagged spine from west to east through the otherwise flat landscape. When fire breaks out on one of the slopes, the wind drives it for miles across the ranges. Only the deep-cut valleys are sometimes spared. As the midday sun beats down, the low-lying areas of the park seem lifeless in the blazing heat. But the grass provides habitat for many insects. There are over 1,200 species of ants in Australia, and for them, it can't be hot enough. Ants are the only source of food for the bizarre thorny devil, a small desert lizard that gobbles up to 750 of them a day. The echidna, an egg-laying mammal, also enjoys the feast of ants. The echidna rummages in rotten logs or digs in the ground for ants and termites. Nature perfected solar power millions of years ago. The blistering heat is ideal for the cold-blooded reptiles. Since they depend on warmth to drive their metabolism and movement, the hot red centre is truly the land of the lizard. The planet's greatest concentration of lizards is here. With lack of water a constant issue, most obtain all the moisture they need from their prey. But a new predator has recently arrived in the district. A formidable and indiscriminate hunter, the feral cat. Over the past 200 years, they have bred in the wild so successfully that up to 10 million feral cats now call Australia home. Feral cats threaten many species of native wildlife with extinction. Biologist Rachel Paltridge is finding out why. She is particularly interested in learning how the common cat can possibly survive, let alone thrive, in the deserts of Central Australia. The red-backed kingfisher is an easy target. Under threat, it flees, leaving eggs and young unprotected. Rachel's work has revealed that deserts are a surprisingly good habitat for cats. While cats' rivals, the fox and the dingo, must travel for water during dry times, cats stay and live off the reptiles.
Stop here, stop. Over there. Come on.
There's no way that I'd be able to capture cats without the help of the Aboriginal women, but with the Aboriginal women we can always get a cat pretty well when we want it. Cats are not adapted to long distance running. They actually tire out quite quickly. This is how Aboriginal people are able to capture cats, initially following their tracks, then flushing the cat out. The cat is exhausted before the Aboriginal trackers are. Once we've caught a cat, we put the radio collar on it.
Let him go. Let him go.
I'll leave it here.
Next day, Rachel picks up signals. When they find tracks, the Aboriginal women piece together the cat's story from prints in the sand.
Aboriginal trackers can interpret from its tracks where it's gone, exactly how far it's travelled,
Last night?
how many times it's pounced on prey, what it's eaten, how many times it's sat down, what's happened when it's met other cats, pretty well everything that's happened.
Rachel's work has cast light on how cats can survive in the desert.
I think the fact that cats can survive independent of water is the most important thing that's allowed them to survive right through the deserts.
While the cat has adapted well to this harsh environment, desert bird populations fluctuate enormously depending on the abundance of the season. Wild budgerigars start breeding in huge flocks as soon as there is water and grass seed about. They sweep across the plains in their hundreds of thousands in one of Australia's most spectacular wildlife displays. To many, the outback is an arid wasteland. But Indigenous Australians use it as a vegetable garden. What at first seems like a desolate acacia scrub provides good food for the experienced bushmen, like Peter Latz, who learned from the Aborigines.
So even though this lovely big mulga's dead, we have now a solanum growing up after the fire, and you can see there's lots of flowers on it. And in another month there's going to be, oh, not only another month, look at the fruit on here already. This is bush tomato, it's not ripe yet. I grew up eating this plant and I like it, but it's just like someone eating olives for the first time. They don't think they're very delicious, but once you get used to the taste, they're good eating as far as I'm concerned. What have we here? This is one of the most important grass seeds in Central Australia. Tiny little seeds, a lot of work. So Aborigines, the women had these coolamans which they used to winnow the seed from the ash and anything else that's in there, and then put it on the grinding stone and grind it up with a bit of water and make like a dough, which you then cook on the ashes, and it's like the bread of the natives. So we're looking at the wheat of the desert here.
Peter is a botanist and a doctor of biology. His publications on the dry habitats of Australia are known internationally. He still goes searching for signs of the original vegetation of the outback.
We're in the middle of what I call a dry jungle. It's just very unusual in the desert to see this vine climbing up the tree, and if we can keep fire away from it, it'll go right to the very top. But you can see here the trees are multi-stemmed because it's been burnt in probably 100, 200 years ago, and it's had to resprout from the base.
In his childhood, Peter and his Aboriginal friends roamed the West McDonalds, searching for nature's treats.
So here's the flower you just pluck at as you walk past, and you can just suck the nice sweet honey out of it.
But which plants are edible and which are toxic? This poisonous plant bears a confusing likeness to the delicious bush tomato.
For the edible things, it's really quite simple. You find the plant and go to the most sensitive part of your skin, which is under your arm, and rub it in there, and if it doesn't sting, then you can try putting it in your mouth. And if it still tastes all right then, well, lucky you've got a pet dingo there, and you can feed him quite a bit of it, and if he doesn't die, then you know that it's edible.
The outback seemed utterly bleak to the first European explorers. For them, the red centre meant only hunger, unbearable heat, and deprivation. But if you understand it like its most iconic resident does, you can find something to eat almost anywhere. The giant red kangaroo is the largest living marsupial in the world. A red kangaroo mother with her offspring. The joey will rely on her milk for a year. They have coped better than many other marsupials and live wherever the trees are to act as shade.
What we have here is the most important plant to the Aborigines, even nowadays. It's used for chewing tobacco. This is a plant that comes up after fire. It's most prolific after fire, and Aborigines probably burnt a lot of country just to produce this plant. They didn't smoke it because it doesn't smoke when it's dried, it just keeps going out. So they got a special ash from different plants and mixed it with the ash and then chewed it, just like chewing tobacco. And what the ash does is actually allow the nicotine to get into your bloodstream easily. You know, the hippies et al., they would like to think it's a psychedelic drug, but actually it's no different to what I'm smoking now.
Peter's grandparents were 19th century German immigrants. The family grew up in the Hermannsburg Lutheran Mission on the edge of the West MacDonnell Ranges. His father was a mechanic. It was here Peter learned about life in the outback, and especially the so-called bush tucker, the food that nature provides, even in the desert.
Yeah, well, I was born here in 1941. Actually born in Alice Springs, but spent my first 12 years of my life here. For a young boy, it was a fantastic life. Because every Saturday we used to, I only had Aboriginal mates at my age, and we would go out every Saturday fishing down in the Fink or eating bush tuckers and lighting up the Spinifex, and sometimes three of us on a donkey with no saddle or bridle, just wandering through the bush.
Hermannsburg is still inhabited, with the old village around the church preserved as a museum. The settlement was founded at the end of the 19th century by immigrant missionaries. Young pastor Carl Strelo was one of the few with the necessary stamina to endure this harsh life.
There was 2 church services every Sunday, one in English and one in Aranda. And then Sunday school for us. That's my father, photo of my father, with my great uncle and the boring machine when they were boring to get water. And the machine is still there over in the distance.
Word gets around that Peter has arrived. His old friend Herman comes to see him. He speaks Aranda, the language of the original inhabitants of the West MacDonnell's region.
We were riding donkeys together when we were young fellas and catching the fish. Herman and I used to go out and spear them, didn't we? Spear them? Yeah. And take netting wire.
Well, we used to walk around
What I owe the people that brought me up is the fact that they taught me not only bush tucker, but they taught me to be a good observer. And that's held me in really good stead as a scientist. There is a theory that the first 5 years is the important part for your brain, and it actually forms pathways. And so my brain is wired more in the Aboriginal way, I think, than the white man's way.
The Dreamtime is the creation story of the Aborigines, and it's still alive today. Legends have passed down from generation to generation about the genesis of the country's hills, canyons, and watercourses. Its sacred landforms mark the Dreamtime's mythic geography. When the rainbow serpent vied with the sun and other great spirits to mould this land, allowing water and life to flow through it. The Goss Bluff crater is one of the most important sites on the Aranda people's spiritual map. Many Aranda come here to commune with their ancestors. Although the land is barren, it's always been the friend of the Aranda. It provides their food, and even in the toughest times, it's never let them down. When it rains, nature produces a special treat. Buried treasure. But these are not pearls, they're ants. Honeypot ants. Although it's hard work, it's always been the duty of women to collect the honeypot ants. First, the honey soldier ants have to be identified among the different species. The sun must be high in the sky, casting few shadows. The rest is done with a practiced eye and patience. It's important to find the exact hole where the soldiers disappear into the earth.
To look for ants with yellow stripe at the back. They come up every after the rain. They walk around, get all the honey from the trees. Them other trees, with them red flowers, they get some honey from there, the workers, and they go down to feed them other ones.
Then the hard part, following the path of the soldiers deep underground. Their tunnels are usually vertical, running 2.5 metres straight down. If you dig carefully at first, you can trace their direction. No honey ant starves, even during the harshest drought, because this particular species creates living food depots. A particular caste of honey ant is force-fed by soldiers when food is abundant. Their expandable abdomens swell with the sweet nectar until they can't move. When times are hard, they simply regurgitate the stored nectar to feed the rest of the colony.
Ngorlondap nunentam ngarantor nunadena mankal merondam hitnam kokamapa ngwalngarta ilkwajak.
You can think of honeypots as vitamin C candy because the ants' abdomens contain many health-giving substances besides sugar. To this day, Aranda women feed them to their children as a cold remedy. But at Hermannsburg, all the kids have to do to get their vitamin C is to go and pick a lemon. This old citrus tree was already bearing fruit when Peter was a boy.
This is the house that I grew up in, and the house looks much the same, but the garden was very different in those days. We had a lawn here where we used to sleep on the hot nights when the house got too hot.
The 200-kilometre long West MacDonnell Ranges are only a remnant of a huge mountain range that once towered above the Red Centre, as high as the Himalayas. Wind, water, ice and heat have eroded the sandstone for hundreds of millions of years, creating the different habitats we see today. To the east, the end of the range disintegrates into sand, forming the dunes of the Simpson Desert. The arid outback never felt the tread of horses until they arrived with the cattle farmers and their stockmen. Now there are more wild horses or brumbies here than on any other continent. Australia was also a major breeding centre for war horses during the British Empire. When machines took over, the horses were set free to join the wild herds of brumbies that roam the West MacDonnell region to this day. Horses need to drink every 24 hours. They socialise around the waterholes. In good seasons, their population increases dramatically. But as an introduced animal, the horse is not as well adapted to drought as endemic species like the emu. In severe drought, emus form large groups and follow the rain clouds for hundreds of miles until they find pasture again. These migrations have left many a farmer in despair when he finds hundreds of these huge, hungry birds trampling his crops. The emu is one of two heraldic animals of Australia, the other being the red kangaroo. Both are relatively common, so much so that in good seasons, these red giants sometimes breed to plague proportions. If they are attacked or during dominance battles, males rock back on their hind legs, using their tails for balance, and lash at each other with sharp claws, like a boxing match. When equally matched opponents face off, the struggle can end up a bloody one. But there are seldom fatalities. More likely it's the terrible droughts that ravage the wildlife of Central Australia. And there are always scavengers, like the wedgetail and the dingoes, to deal with the carcasses. In times of drought, the brumbies are the least adaptable. It's been 8 months without any rain. As the water dries up, the pressure on the waterholes is enormous. Not only horses, but cattle, camels, donkeys, goats and rabbits have to share the resources with the native animals. Food around the waterholes soon runs out, and the horses have to travel further each day to eat. This makes them weaker still, and soon they are caught in a deadly cycle of starvation and thirst. With 200 horses drinking at this waterhole every day, it soon dries out. They take to digging in the dry riverbeds. stallions fight with each other for a mouthful of wet sand. A desperate mare pushes her foal aside. The mother must stay alive to breed again. It's the law of nature. The predators await their opportunity. Perhaps the cruelest irony of all is that within a few hours of the foal's death, it starts raining. Bringing 50 millimetres in a flash flood. The casualties of a lost struggle are washed away. And within a few days, the green shoots will come through, and the survivors will eat again. Peter lives where he feels most at home, in nature, at the foot of the West MacDonnell Ranges. It is 50 kilometres to Alice Springs, so he grows as much of his own food as possible. His plot is mostly natural, and he makes sure that no introduced plants grow on it. It's shaded by giant eucalyptus, a very special tree for the original Australians.
This is called a ghost gum for obvious reasons. In the dream time, there was these Aboriginal ladies, young ladies who passed through here, and they were very proud of their bodies, and they used to dance, showing off their beautiful bodies. And this is one of them that is still here, dancing, showing me her beautiful bodies. Whereas over there's old husband, grumpy old man saying, "Stop being such a show-off."
Peter built this little house himself. It has electricity and running water, unusual out here.
This is the remains of a billion-year-old stromatoliths. They were the first organisms to create reefs on the planet and created the oxygen that we breathe. This is part of a jawbone from Alcuda of a wombat-like animal bigger than a sheep that was very common here 8 million years ago.
Peter lives alone. His 3 children visit him when they can, with his grandchildren. He devotes himself to his passion, the natural history of the West MacDonnells. Some of his fossils give an indication of what the vegetation was like in the early days of life on this part of the earth.
So about 8 million years ago, the biggest bird that ever walked on the planet was walking around in this part of the world, and I'm helping the expert dig out the bones east of Alice Springs. And here's just a little toe bone of the bird, and here's part of its huge leg bone. And it's not related to the emu, it's related to the geese, actually.
Australia has not always looked like this. The valleys of the West MacDonnells were once lush and green. Mighty trees grew here, whose leaves were eaten by that prehistoric species of giant goose.
The interesting thing about this whole area is that there is something like 15 to 20 types of shrubs and trees, there's such a diversity of plants that you have to say it's a jungle, a mixture of all sorts of different plants. And that's high biodiversity. That makes this place very special indeed.
Although the red sandstone has hardly any ready nutrients, the vegetation has thrived on recent heavy rain. But it is already tinder dry again and ready to burst into flames. Once everything is burned to charcoal, the dry roots of the shrub no longer give the rocks support, and erosion will take its course.
So here we're looking at the type of vegetation that I consider was the primary Gondwana land vegetation that was common all over this desert 100,000 years ago. And you only find little patches of it left here in these fire shadow areas where the fire can't get into. But all you have to do is just look around the corner up on the hill here, and you see the Spinifex with the mallees. Now, mallees love fire, so that would have had dry jungle all over it before you got all the fire coming in and destroying what's behind us.
Spinifex is so flammable that it even burns soaking wet. This shaggy grass, which is almost indigestible for animals, colonises any area that fire has ravaged. It's so prolific that it eliminates all its competition.
Of course, Spinifex doesn't sit down and say, I'm going to take over the mulga. It is just a process that's happening where one plant has a better advantage after fire than the other one. But I like to think of the Spinifex sitting there saying, "Ah, mulga, you're doomed. We're taking over. You've had it, mate."
In winter, the nighttime temperature in the desert drops below zero. In this season, it's safe to light a small campfire. Peter is now over 70 years old. He worked on cattle stations before he began to study biology. He has spent most of his life in the outdoors. 4 plants are named after him as international recognition for his botanical work. The insects move more slowly after sunset. The narrow-footed marsupial mouse, the dunnart, is on the hunt. Almost all small mammals in Central Australia are nocturnal. Otherwise, the heat of the day would dehydrate their fragile bodies. Once it has devoured a rich treat like this grasshopper, it stores fat reserves in its tail against times of drought. This resourceful marsupial mouse cannot do anything to prevent the destruction of its habitat by fire. The bush ignites quickly in the outback, mostly from so-called dry storms, when lightning strikes but no rain falls. But man-made fires have also changed the landscape. Wherever the Aboriginal tribes roamed during their seasonal migrations, they used their fire sticks to create paths and clearings. Many animals are killed by bushfires if they're too slow to escape. Fire in the flat grassland spreads quickly and can soon get out of control. But here at least it's accessible by fire crews. Mountain fires, however, are much more difficult to extinguish. They can unleash an inferno that will burn out of control. Few animals possess the survival strategy of the echidna. Probably why it's one of the oldest species of mammals on Earth. Fire has changed this landscape permanently. For some species it brings new life, but for others, permanent disaster. The winner in the end is the indestructible Spinifex grass.
So what we can see here is there's been 2 fires here, and the taller trees survived the first fire, but what was here before is now burnt away, and we had young mulga coming up, and they've been burnt in the second fire, so we don't expect to see any mulga back here again. Whereas you look over there, you can see where there's still some mulga left. So this is now just ready for Spinifex to come in, and goodbye mulga forever.
Even in the desert, there are secret stores of water. Apparently parched rivers can still retain moisture in deep layers of sediment, even after years of brutal drought. Ranges are punctuated by canyons and gorges caused by millions of years of water erosion. The Finke River, the most well known in this region, is one of the oldest river systems on Earth. 400 million years ago, it carved out the Glen Helen Gorge in the West MacDonalds. Along with 5 other gorges in the ranges, the waterhole remains full, even in extreme dry periods, and forms a precious habitat. For most of the day, it's shaded and cool. The gorges of the West MacDonald Ranges provide an important ecological niche. The freshwater fish in these shallow waters used to live in the ocean. Until millions of years ago, they were enclosed by the land. In the dry season, the fish struggle against the declining oxygen content in the water. Predators then find them easy pickings. Much about this unique place still awaits discovery. The picturesque Ormiston Gorge, with its rugged cliffs and sheltered valley billabongs, is one of Peter Latz's favourite hunting grounds. It is so botanically rich because it is largely protected from bushfires.
Now this tree is very fire sensitive. You won't find any in the Spinifex up the hill there, but it was an important plant to the Aborigines, and they told me when I first asked them about it, we used it to smoke our babies. And I thought, smoked babies, they must be delicious. No, I got it wrong. What they do is they dig a hole, baby size, light a fire in it, till the coals burn down, and then they put this plant on top of the coals, and the fumes that come up are very good for the baby. Even an adult can be treated this way, and they say after you lie there for half an hour, you can get up and hunt a kangaroo.
The series of billabongs in the deep gorges of the West MacDonalds inspires images of a desert Eden. Today, only remnants of this earthly paradise are preserved, and you have to look long and hard to find them. Millennia of fire and heat have transformed this into a dramatically austere landscape. but for connoisseurs of the past, a protected valley at the southern edge of the West MacDonnell National Park takes us to a time when dinosaurs still roamed the earth. A fringe of St Mary's palms points the way to one of the most beautiful places in Central Australia. In the heat of summer, the life-giving water for these ancient evergreen trees comes from natural reservoirs in the porous, weathered rock. What Peter is particularly interested in here are some shrubs with feather-like branches, not unlike palm fronds.
So most people think this is a palm. In fact, it's closer to the ferns. It's really dinosaur food. This is a plant, or very close to it, that was around when dinosaurs ruled the earth. It's very ancient. And in fact, if you look at the big palms behind that grow very tall, you'd think they'd be much older. This individual here is probably 4 times as old as those big tall palms in the background.
Palm Valley is the only place in Central Australia where St Mary's palms survive. They are a remnant of the red centre's ancient tropical past. While botanists once struggled to understand what the species was doing here, the Aborigines have their own explanation from the Dreamtime. In their creation history of this country, every rock and every tree has its place and its own special purpose.
The Aboriginal story is very interesting too, because there's a hill 100 kilometres north of here, and the story, the Dreamtime story, is that the old men were initiating the young men, and they had their hair tied into a bun behind their head, and which was traditional. And there was this huge bushfire. It was so terrific that it killed all the old men and blew the young men up into the sky, and some of them landed near Goss's Bluff and turned into the grass trees, and the rest of them landed here in Palm Valley. And so these trees you see here are actually, in the mythology, the spirit of the young initiates who were burnt in this horrific fire.
Peter searches for rare plants that once dominated the continent. Due to Peter's discoveries, we are now more aware of the prehistory of the outback. And this gem in the heart of the West MacDonnell National Park is a living remnant of how the red heart of Australia once looked, before fire changed the country forever.